Hello, Dr. Dyke Drummond here at the home of thehappymd.com in beautiful Seattle, Washington. Welcome to the latest episode of the Physicians on Purpose podcast. Tools so you can recognize and prevent your own burnout. Stories of burnout put to its highest and best use, and wellness leadership strategies. Everything you need to be a physician on purpose. Hello again, this is Dr. Dyke Drummond at the home of The Happy MD in beautiful Seattle, Washington with the latest Physicians on Purpose podcast. And I'm really excited about this one. I have Dr. Heath Jolliff DO. He is an emergency room doctor and a whole bunch of other things, including a physician coach. His website is physiciancoachingsolutions.com. No dashes, no dots, physiciancoachingsolutions.com. And I asked Heath to come on the show here because he just was a co-author of a fascinating study that went in depth into one of the stresses that can contribute to physician burnout. And in my teachings, we have 5 universal causes of burnout: the practice of medicine, your job, leadership, life, and the programming of our medical education. But there are also hundreds of additional stressors that can be the last straw and drive a person into burnout. And what we're going to talk about today is the whole issue of liability, malpractice, and how left hung out to dry we are by the complete absence of any training in these topics during our formal medical education, and really no other source for it. So Heath, welcome to the program. And let me just ask you, tell me about your history, because I believe that you're an expert witness in some cases and you've done some legal work. You're an ER doc, so you've been in and around this kind of, you're an educator. Tell us a little bit about how you decided to do this study. We'll walk through the study and walk through what you found.
Well, thanks, Dyke, for having me and your interest in this. I have to give a lot of credit to my co-authors in this paper. And at the time I was a program director, and we had seen a need to teach residents about the medical legal system, because unfortunately, we just don't get a lot of that in medical school or often in residency. My co-author and I had done some medical malpractice work with attorneys, and we thought it would be interesting to invite some real attorneys to help us with this. So we had an attorney who defends physicians, an attorney who's a plaintiff's attorney. We hired some folks that were medical experts to help us with this also. And then we used chief residents to be witnesses and the people on trial. And our goal was to see, can we teach folks a little bit about the system that they don't have a lot of knowledge about, but often bring it up as a point of apprehension, fear, hey, what happens if I get sued, those type of things. And so we thought this would be a great way to do this, and then to record it for other people to watch.
So it's sort of like the Twilight Zone. Imagine, if you will, you're being sued. Let's step into the courtroom, Jim. Right?
Absolutely.
Something like that. Okay, so it's a full mock trial. Now, was there a script for the trial, or was there just a premise and then you went live into defending and taking care of it?
Yeah, we had actually used a case that had gone to trial and had been finished. And so we used the real details of the case. This was a case on chest pain because we knew we'd have a lot of different groups of physicians. We had nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, medical students, and even attorneys who were watching. So we wanted to be something fairly common that people would see, but also would understand. So our defending physician had a couple weeks to look at the case, get to know the case, and the legal team did the same. And then the case was presented. The only difference, we made this 90 minutes so that people could actually sit through the whole thing and watch it instead of, a trial that may normally take a couple days. And then we presented it in a compact fashion to go through these details so that people could understand what it would be like to actually be on trial or be a jury member in this trial.
And so 90 minutes. And then let me just ask real quick, because I'm sure there's people that are asking this right now. Is this publicly available? Can we watch the case? Is it mounted someplace for public viewing?
It is. So in our paper, that was one of the things we wanted to do is provide a link so that people could watch this. And when we were collecting our data, this was during COVID, so most people couldn't do this live. So we had to have a way for folks to be able to tune in and watch this. And we had over 600 people who were able to view the conference. And we had some criteria that you had to watch the thing and answer some questions. And about 400 of those folks were able to do that. So we had over 400 people that actually met the criteria to be involved in the study, which was really nice.
And I've got links to both the paper and inside the paper, the links to the viewing page. Wherever you're listening to this or watching this right now, it's down below whatever frame you're looking at. So I'm in the virtual room. I'm watching this case unfold. I'm undoubtedly thinking about my own experience with patients and chest pain and all that kind of stuff. And let's just say, just as a preamble, liability is steeped through everything that we do. When the buck stops with you, when you're the one making the diagnosis, when you're the one responsible for the orders, and you're in the kind of top-down leadership structure of a clinical care team where nobody can actually do anything until you tell them to, and they're going to do exactly what you request, liability and thoughts of liability are in every decision that we make. And you certainly don't have to have a case and go to trial to feel stress from fears of malpractice and liability issues. You were telling me when we were talking before we started the recording that only about a third of doctors actually get sued, but I'm certain that everybody has liability issues on their mind much more frequently than that.
Absolutely. I think it's always the case that doesn't go as well as what we'd hoped. Maybe a complaint from a patient or a concern from, a peer review, it generates that stress in your mind of, uh-oh, what did I do wrong? Or am I going to be sued? And how is this going to work? Because, we're in the business of helping people. And the last thing we want to do is cause some type of harm or alleged harm. And so physicians, I think, are really concerned about this. And, as you know, we tend to be perfectionists, and this kind of adds to that stress, I think.
Yep. So everybody got to watch the trial. And then what were your questions to the study group afterwards? What were the answers that it gave you to those inquiries?
That's great. So the big question is the audience was this very large jury. And one of the questions that we wanted to know is, the lawsuit alleged failure to diagnose of actually a myocardial infarction and a delay in that diagnosis. So the big questions that we wanted to know is, do you feel like the physician involved in this case met the standard of care? And most people felt that they did. But then, was the care excellent care? Is it something you would be proud of doing on your own? And that number dropped to half of the folks.
Okay.
Which was really interesting. It's like, met the standard of care, but I wouldn't be happy if that was my care or if I was the patient and received that care. So that was interesting. And then the question was, what would you change, or would you consider changing anything if, after watching this? And 72% of the people said, I would probably change something in my clinical practice after watching that. And 93% of people said, I would change the way I document things in my medical record after watching this, because in the trial, there were portions, just like any trial, you hope to document the best thing, but anything that comes up to peer review or legal, you always think, gosh, I could have documented that better so other people could understand. And I think that was the big message that people got, was I should probably look at how I document to make sure it's a little more clear to someone else reading my chart, not just me.
So the general thought process was I should document more like I'm presenting it to somebody else rather than writing notes for myself.
Correct. Especially when, a lot of times trials may not happen for a year from now. And the question is, can you remember what you really did with this patient versus, this was an emergency medicine case. So versus all the other chest pains you see, does this stand out to you by your documentation, or does it not?
Gotcha. And then as you think back on the experience, now you've got a little distance on it. You've seen the whole feedback group. You've collaborated with a bunch of co-authors on the case. What's one thing that surprised you about the proceeding or the findings?
Yeah, I think the first thing that surprised us is how many people were interested to participate. It's a great topic, but when we look back in the literature, this was probably the most viewed trial by physicians ever, even though this was a mock trial.
No doubt.
So we were so happy to see that. That helped us with our numbers. And also to what we learned is that a lot of people said, I don't really remember the class in medical school where I was taught to document. So we were concerned about, the medical legal learning about that. But when you go back and you think about where was I ever taught how to correctly document, not just use the electronic medical record, but, what do I document versus what don't I document? How do I document against discrepancies? Because sometimes, someone else, a nurse or a tech or another physician will say something in the chart that maybe you disagree with. How do I do that? And so I think that was a good thing for us to see, that people were interested in that and thought they would change based upon that.
Well, and I think that's the same class. The How to Document class is the one that was right after the class on how to lead a team.
Yes, absolutely.
Leadership
we must have
skills.
both missed that day.
Leadership skills for physicians. Well, and Heath, just so you know, Heath is a graduate of our quadruple aim physician leadership retreat. And one of the sections in that retreat is physician leadership power tools. So we actually do dissect a physician's command and control, give orders and comply leadership style and all the shortcomings of that. But yeah, what I teach typically is that if there's only 3 reasons to put something in the chart: the bill, medico-legal, and continuity, which is that somebody else could pick up the chart and take that patient if you weren't there. If it doesn't have to do with those things, then it probably doesn't belong in the chart, and you don't need to waste your time in putting it in there. And that longer and more is never better. People want a concise note that they can pick up and run with. Do you have any advice for the listeners here about if there is a discrepancy? If I see something in the chart that somebody else has put in there that I want to disagree with, do you have any language or way that you've come up with to do that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's good. So when I'm teaching residents, one of the things I look at is, we always have that thing: if it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. We know that's not true. There's a lot of things we do that we don't document, but just what you said is maybe a good question, or a good example would be maybe at triage, a nurse has put down that the patient is having pain in their right lower abdomen, which makes everyone think of appendicitis. And when you examine them, the pain's actually on the left side of their abdomen. I tell people, don't make it controversial. Just say, at triage, the nurse noted the patient complained of pain in the right side of their abdomen. On my exam, they weren't having pain there. It was actually on the left. And patient agrees with that, and it's just a simple, non-adversarial, just document what you see, and, because things change.
Right on. Excellent. And then, has this now been stood up as a mandatory class for all the residents in the training programs you've been associated with? Is anybody actually using this as an ongoing resource?
That's a great question, and one I don't know. I think from the folks that were involved in our study, yes. And as I was telling you before this, most law school programs do this to teach their law students about going to trial. And it just seems like this is something we should do. And I have a friend of mine who is a attorney, and he was very surprised when I told him that this wasn't something that was common in medical school. And he looked at me very seriously over top of his glasses, and he said, "It should be." And
Right.
I agree.
Well, and it's also a very foreign form of inquiry for physicians. So we're always asking questions. If you want, we're taking testimony from our patients, which could be a way to interpret it for a lawyer. But typically we have some open-ended questions mixed in there, and we're looking to get to a diagnosis that is not necessarily certain. It's a working diagnosis. It's a hypothesis. You put me on the stand, though, and put me in a trial, the lawyers are questioning in a completely different fashion. Many times their questions are closed into trapdoors, and the doctor is having an emotional maelstrom on the stand while the lawyer is trying to win a point, win a case, win a verdict, win a settlement. And doctors, in my experience, it's very easy to be completely destroyed and decompensate on the stand when you're faced with that kind of questioning, especially if you haven't had a chance to do a mock trial before you ended up in the courtroom.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's out of our arena. Sometimes we're not even familiar with the terminology that's being used in the courtroom. The system is adversarial. We want to help people, and sometimes the opposing counsel is there to make you look like you don't care and that you're not there to help, and that makes people very hurt, angry. You don't know what to do with those feelings, and so I think this is a good thing for I would like to see this involved in a lot of medical curriculum, just because I think we were talking earlier, pilots are trained to meet all kinds of things in their training, that disaster events that will probably never happen. And even if you say only 1 in 3 physicians have been sued, it would be nice for us to know a little bit about that, because I think most physicians, regardless if they win or lose a case, it's not something that anybody wants to go through. And despite how rare it is, I think it's a good thing to train for.
Yep. And even though only 1 in 3 are actually sued over the course of their career, all of us live in fear of it.
That's correct.
It's a clear and present danger in your mind, even if you end up having a career where you're not sued. Great. Any last thoughts about the study, the experience? Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think, the big thing is I had worked in another state where the medical malpractice insurance company actually required you to spend a day with a defense attorney.
Oh my.
And look over your documentation and all these things. And, when I had to do that, I thought, oh, this is going to be awful. It was probably one of the best days of my career, because we were allowed to bring in charts of our own, and they would go through it and say, you could state this better this way, or they would say, paint the picture, which I use that term a lot, paint the picture of what happened in your chart, so that I can understand that as someone who is possibly on a jury that doesn't know a lot about medicine, or even as an attorney. And the other thing is, this is about patient safety too. It's, what can we do to change our practices to make things safer for our patients? And, some of that comes from documentation, and some of that comes from just the way we practice and what we do to make sure that that's an obvious thing that we're, because that's our job. We're here to look out for patients and to protect them, as well as ourselves and our colleagues. So what can we do to make that happen in a better fashion?
Right on. Thank you, Heath. This has been Dr. Heath Jolliff, emergency room doc, emergency program. Were you a program director?
Program director.
Program director, expert witness, physician coach. His website is physiciancoachingsolutions.com. No dots, no dashes. physiciancoachingsolutions.com. And we've been talking about a study of the self-reflection that is driven by witnessing a mock malpractice trial by a team of doctors and residents. Fascinating stuff. Links to the study and to the actual video mock trial are in the notes down below, wherever you're getting this podcast. Heath, thanks so much again. This is Dyke Drummond at the home of the Happy MD in beautiful Seattle, Washington. That's this edition of the Physicians on Purpose podcast. Be safe, keep breathing. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Dyke. That was great.